Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to the new year 2020. Now, tonight we are going to be covering a number of different topics and going at quite a rapid pace. But you see, the first meeting that we are going to cover, and we're going to cover the entire meeting, believe it or not. Since when have we been able to cover an entire meeting of anything? We have so much commentary and analysis to provide you. But in this case, we are going to provide the complete coverage of the December Ramsey County Rail Authority meeting that was held. Now, they had two very weighty issues on the agenda. And so we're going to get started with that, but before we do, I want to welcome my co-host, Mr. Greg Copeland, who's here to help me with the news this evening. Thank you, Mr. Copeland, for being here.
Great to be here with you as always, Diana.
And we are going to, as I indicated, get started with our coverage of the Ramsey County Rail Authority meeting. Now remember, all of the members who are on the Ramsey County Rail Authority are all the Ramsey County Commissioners. So they're the same exact people. When they have their meetings at the Ramsey County Board, we have covered those meetings and have discussed how very seldom do they actually include information during that meeting so that the public can actually get a good grasp of what the issues are. Well, you think that maybe with the Ramsey County Rail Authority, it could possibly be different since they have such an agenda to want to educate the public on the importance of mass transit. But as you'll see, we're disappointed. Well, let's get started with our first clip of the meeting.
Like to call to order the Regional Railroad Authority. Roll call, please.
Carter. Here. Fretham. Here. Castillo. Here. McDonough. McGuire. Here. Reinhardt. Here. Ortega.
Aye. I'll entertain a motion on the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Hearing no further discussion, roll call.
Carter. Yes. Fretham. Aye. Castillo. Yes. McGuire. Aye. Reinhardt. Aye. Ortega.
Aye. I'll entertain a motion on the minutes of November 12th, 2019.
So moved. Second.
Hearing no further discussion, roll call.
Carter. Yes. Fretham. Aye. Castillo. Aye. McGuire. Aye. Reinhardt. Aye. Ortega.
Aye. We just have two items. They're administrative. Well, one is a policy, but the administrative item is the Gateway Corridor Commission termination and transfer of funds. Jim, you want to say something about that?
All good news. I'll make a motion to approve. And with the transfer of funds, we won't be asked for any money to move forward on the Joint Powers Board for financial commitments.
Great.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, roll call.
Carter. Yes. Fretham. Aye. Castillo. Aye. McDonough.
Aye.
McGuire. Aye. Reinhardt. Aye. Ortega.
Aye.
Mr. Copeland, we are now over 50% through the meeting of the Ramsey County Rail Authority. This meeting was just around 4 minutes in length. Now, you'll probably notice that County Commissioner Jim McDonough wasn't there for all those first votes that they sped through so rapidly.
You mean the minutes?
But he was there in time to stand and make the motion for this transfer of funds. Now, I decided to take a look and see if I could do a little research on exactly what is this transfer of funds all about. Because as a member of the public watching this, I have no idea what happened to the funds, where did they transfer the funds to. I don't have any idea how much the funds are. I don't have any idea why
Yes.
that they have taken the Gateway Corridor Joint Powers Committee and terminated it. There is no information on any of these weighty questions, and obviously this is tied in to the Gold Line BRT, which spans from Woodbury to the Union Depot in St. Paul.
And what was striking to me, missing, was a staff report related to any of the points that you're making. Because usually it's been the practice, I think, in the past that staff makes a report, then there's a motion, then there's some discussion on the motion, and then there's a vote on the motion. In this case, the county administrator was there, present, quiet. I didn't see any other staff making a report.
No, and you don't even know who is going to be doing this transfer. So now in my research and looking into this, first of all, the amount of money that is being transferred from the now disbanded Gateway Commission, Gateway Corridor Commission and Joint Powers Agreement, the amount is $700,000. So that's the amount of money that we're talking about. And the fiscal agent who's been in charge of managing this money and controlling, how the money's been dispersed and all of that is actually Washington County. Now, we don't know any of that either from this little snippet that they had of their meeting. And what they've done is that this is actually now transferred to the new Gold Line Commission that has been formed, because the Gold Line, the environmental process is nearly completed, if not completed, and a lot of the engineering has been done, and now they're to the point where they don't need this initial corridor joint powers agreement that they originally started with. So that's really what's going on here, and yet they just basically just ran off and said, okay, eyes all.
And they did it with great dispatch.
Yeah. Like they were in a hurry to catch the train.
Oh, you're talking actually.
The bus.
Exactly. This is a bus route. Only, 400 million plus. I mean, it's one of their favorite numbers, spending $400 million on these new bus lines and building dedicated roadways and aye.
So that was the administrative item that we were told was on the agenda. So let's hear what the next agenda item is that's going to take up the rest of the meeting, less than 2 minutes.
The next item is the approval of the 2020 and 2021 Ramsey County Regional Rail Authority budget and the 2020 tax levy.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
No.
Do you need any information on this?
I'm all right, thank you.
Okay. Let me just suffice to say that the Regional Rail Authority budget is pretty much an ongoing, the budget is pretty much the Union Depot and our 4 projects. And the levy is pretty much to the max. So it's sort of a perfunctory just to keep all our activities going.
It's 1 year out of a 20-year budget where you've already committed.
Yeah. Okay, hearing no further discussion, roll call.
Carter. Yes. Fretham. Aye. Modis Castillo.
Aye.
McDonough.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
Ortega.
Aye. Any corridor updates? Well, thank you very much and happy holidays. We're adjourned.
Now, are we to believe his description of the budget of the Ramsey County Rail Authority as just sort of, business as usual? That it really only covers their 4 projects in the Union Depot. Now this makes it sound like it's so small, that it's de minimis, that it really, it really doesn't matter that much. When you look up the details about what the budget is and what that tax levy is, they are both over $20 million. Now, is that perfunctory?
Not in my world.
Now, of course, you may say that perhaps Commissioner Ortega is just, this is just the way that he describes things. And that in doing this type of description like this, that, this is a way that he has, that, maybe this was just a one-off day, that he really meant to say more about the budget, that he had best intentions of not trying to mislead the public into thinking that this budget really is of no consequence. Well, let's take a look at how he described his trip when he went with the 35 people who went out to Richmond, Virginia to see the Pulse BRT. And Mr. Copeland, you have a comment before we get into
just
that.
a question. You said 35 people?
Yes.
35 people had to go out to Richmond, Virginia?
Right.
Now, is this an all-cost paid trip by the taxpayers?
I think they did have the opportunity of asking for reimbursement from the county. Yes, that's correct.
Wow.
So that's probably part of that budget that was just passed.
This sounds bigger than a congressional committee, operation here. We got to take 35 people to go investigate what?
A bus rapid transit route, the Pulse in Richmond, Virginia. Now, of course, on these news programs, we have covered this in great detail. We have brought you film footage from Richmond, Virginia, so that you know exactly what that bus route looks like. But let's go back into our archives and see how Commissioner Ortega, when he came back from that trip, how he described it to his constituents. Let's see how accurate he is in the use of his words.
Commissioner Ortega, outside board and committee reports.
Well, we spent most of the week, Victoria went along to Richmond, Virginia. We took her to a rush line. I'll let her elaborate more, but we had a good turnout. I think about 35 people came along with us, included most of the folks along the corridor, the cities, two mayors, the mayor of Maplewood and the mayor of White Bear Lake came along. It was a packed day, I would say. We started at 8 o'clock sharp, and I don't think we finished till 5 at least.
Always later than that.
Yeah, so it was very good, and we've learned a lot, and it's very much like our corridor.
Yep.
The size of the city, the geography, except for the weather, of course, but it was a good trip.
Good, good.
He is the chair of the Ramsey County Rail Authority, and that's all he has to say. Now, Mr. Copeland, did you notice that he said that they spent all week out there, but it was a very packed day? So that means he was out there on county business, supposedly, for a whole week, and yet really was only there for one day of business. It was a very packed day. You heard the timeline he gave, and it was exhausting for him.
Yeah, 8 to 5.
8 to 5.
I think that's what he said.
That's right. Well, imagine what it would be looking at either of our lives. It would certainly start before 8 and ends after 5. Now, here's the other thing. We also heard him say how the bus rapid transit route there in Richmond, Virginia for the Pulse is very similar to what is going to be along the Bruce Vento Trail, the Rush Line or the Purple Line, the route that's going to go from the Union Depot north to White Bear Lake. Now, for those of you who have been on the Bruce Vento Trail, you know that this is an ecological corridor that has many trees and a great tree canopy, and it's wonderful. I mean, the animals use it for moving between different watersheds and everything. So.
And the bus isn't going to pick them up, is it?
No.
No. No, and when we went on the tour that the rail authority had, last summer, you know, wow, nobody on the bus that was in the staff capacity, none of the engineering people that are designing this thing could say the word tree, because they said they're going to remove the existing vegetation, quote unquote, the existing vegetation. They didn't want anybody on that bus. Well, frankly, we're all people that, you know, except for the mayor of Maplewood and some of the folks on there from White Bear Lake, don't even live on the corridor. And, you know, they didn't want to talk about all the trees they're going to remove. As you point out, that whole corridor in Maplewood, north of the lake, running up through the city, is going to just be cannibalized. I mean, there's no other way you can say it. It's going to disappear. It's never going to come back in anybody's lifetime that's breathing today as it is now. So this is a tragic loss that we're about to inflict on ourselves to the tune of $400 million.
And the question is then, so if that bus route, that BRT route in Richmond, Virginia is so similar to the one that we have here, that is going to be the Bruce Vento, the Rush line, the Purple line, then that must mean that Richmond, Virginia had to suffer through that pain as well of losing all the treed canopy for their BRT route. Well, let's take a look at the bird's eye view of the Richmond, Virginia BRT route, and you come to your own conclusion how many trees were lost in Richmond, Virginia, contrary to the impression that Commissioner Ortega is giving to his constituents. So here we are, you're looking at the route, that is Broad Street. The Pulse BRT bus goes up and down Broad Street. Broad Street is more similar to what University Avenue looks like.
It doesn't look like frost.
It does not look like frost. Oh, look at here's from the other direction. And there is eventually, we will see the BRT coming into view in one of the lanes as we look through, across the sky line and all of the big buildings. And I believe that when we talked to the engineer, the project engineer in Richmond, Virginia, he indicated that there was no loss of trees in the construction of the BRT Pulse route in Richmond, Virginia. That's because they used an existing roadway that was already there. They painted dedicated lanes, and they also did have some areas where it shared lanes with other buses. Imagine that. And yet they say it's very successful. It works perfectly. It's cut down on the congestion. And yet, all it is a more rapid bus with elevated platforms and dedicated lanes. So I think you get the picture. Is Commissioner Rafael Ortega sincere and authentic when he says what he says to his constituents?
Well, and frankly, that's the first time I've seen this footage, as you know. And I'm looking at a completely urban environment here. There's nothing remotely suburban, rural. And I think we can say that along that line, along the proposed Rush line, we would not find anything that looks like this coming out of Maplewood up and through to
There's
White Bear
the bus.
Lake.
There's the Pulse bus right there. We zoomed right on into it.
Yeah, he's right that it looks a little bit like downtown St. Paul. You could say that, I suppose. But and they're intending to run this line up Jackson, in front of the Regions Hospital. and then out the Phelan Boulevard and go north from there. But once you're out of downtown St. Paul, yeah, I could see why they could say they didn't take down any trees, because, hey, where would they take down the trees? But when you're going to destroy essentially the Vento Trail, there's no nice way to say it. And the thing that disturbs me about this, Dan, is you've got this beautiful, in terms of a transportation corridor, the Min Pass lanes out on 35, brand new. Just the best roads in St. Paul lead to White Bear Lake and back again, and you can do it all in about 13 minutes. Almost during rush hour, I think, and it's a investment that the public's already paid for. So you don't have to do anything. If you want to get to White Bear Lake in a hurry, this is the way to go. All this other stuff about all these stops and stations, unfortunately, the bus system is losing money as we sit here. The ridership goes down about 6% a year for the last couple of years.
Right.
That's unfortunate. I mean, I ride the bus all the time, but here we are.
Right. So my question to the viewers is exactly this. We've got the Ramsey County Rail Authority. They've got their 4-minute meeting on December 17th. They've got 2 very big issues. They gave out no information. And not only that, they seem to imply to the residents of Ramsey County that their budget is just simply, just a speck in a little dust ball. When in reality, it's over $20 million, and they just, of course, ignore the fact that their rush line, their purple line, is not at all like the Pulse BRT route in Richmond, Virginia.
Well, the line that will stay with me from Mr. Rafael Ortega, the chair of this rail authority, is it's at maximum statutory levy capacity. What are they thinking? I mean, where's the train? Okay, we did Union Depot. That was what, $240 plus million, and it's very nice. But honestly, I don't know. I'm very frustrated because I see what we need in terms of additional investment in transit. I live in St. Paul. I live off of Payne Avenue, and I know how full those buses are, and I see a system that doesn't even have the capacity to get a citizen from Payne Avenue to Rice Street on Maryland. Okay, there's no bus, and it's ridiculous. There's simple things that could be done. Buy some buses. No, these guys want to buy a roadway for a bus that's going to make well over a dozen stops on its way to White Bear Lake. Why? I don't know. Victoria Reinhardt, maybe. She lives in White Bear Lake.
And yet she'll continue to probably go to work in her big fancy car or vehicle and not ride the bus.
Well.
So now next we're going to be turning to the next topic, which is looking at some of the film footage from a recent St. Paul City Council meeting. Now, it was longer than 4 minutes, so I do have to give them credit for that. They took a little bit more time, but they really jam-packed a lot of public hearings into this meeting. They had nobody attending or speaking at any of the public hearings that they were holding. So let's just take a look at one of those public hearings. And I think you might find it interesting because, again, this is in December. They are looking at, budgets for the next coming year, and they're talking about, and their motion is about, changing and adjusting budgets for certain departments up at City Hall. So let's take a look.
Item number 51, Resolution Public Hearing 19-407, establishing the 2019 budgets for rent payments and internal loan repayments related to the Snelling Midway site and authorizing an interfund loan for the Snelling Midway District Stormwater System.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Seeing none, Mr. Tao moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted.
Wow, that was quick business. Now, exactly what is all of that about?
You know,
well,
without-
that means that one department didn't have enough money in its budget, so then it has to go and borrow money from the sanitary sewer fund. Oh, you know what? They got that right from the playbook in Maplewood. Maplewood robbed the sanitary sewer utility fund of $2 million so that they could go and buy land in the Gladstone area for land speculation. So you see, here we are. We don't even have a staff report. Mr. Copeland, your comments.
Well, I wasn't at the meeting or for that public hearing, but I'm going to go out on a big limb. And, you know, sometimes you can get it sawed off and get in trouble. But, you know, I'm guessing that Snelling Midway site that they're talking about, who the hell knows what that is? But I'm going to take a guess. Oh, the new stadium. What do you think? The new soccer stadium? You know, you're talking about a Maplewood breach of public trust, I would say, and how money's spent. We got the same thing going on in St. Paul. We gave Dr. McGuire millions and millions of dollars that should have been spent on our streets. Instead, they went to subsidize his stadium. Now, he would tell us it's our stadium now, but for those of us that have to ride on the roads, it's his stadium. And that's where the money went. And who's kidding who?
Right. And so here we have money being taken out of the sanitary sewer utility fund, which goes to generally utilities, road improvements, infrastructure. Right. And that money is being taken out of that account to go to a stadium because the stadium can't make ends meet. Wow. Now, how quick was that on the agenda for them to really ramrod it through without anybody questioning a thing? And of course, because there is no staff report, if you were watching this, you would have no idea what just hit you. Now, let's take a look at the next clip of another very speedy financial transaction.
Item number 52, Resolution Public Hearing 19-415, amending the spending plans for the fire, parks, and general government departments in the general fund.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Seeing none, Mr. Tolbert moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item number 53, Resolution Public Hearing 19-406, amending the spending and financing plans for various city departments.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Seeing none, Ms. Nicker moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted.
Again, you've just had spending and financial budgets of various departments up at City Hall in St. Paul being adjusted, readjusted, tweaked, moved around, and nobody knows in the public what just happened. Does it mean that the public safety departments that are affected are now getting less money? Or does it mean that the parks has gotten more money? Or does it mean that they've all gotten less money because, they got to shuffle it off, to some other pet project like, I don't know, like the stadium. And they are doing a disservice to the public by not even saying what it is that they're actually doing.
Well, again, I mean, no staff report. Now, presumably they had some written documentation in their agenda packet. One can imagine that might have happened, explaining all this, and I'm sure they individually, all 7 members, pored over those details and have no questions about anything going on in St. Paul, where we don't have enough money to even hire the minimum number of police replacement recruits to keep up our current staffing levels, and have fallen way behind the authorized level in the police department at a time when we had record crime in St. Paul in 2019. So, they can have all the little seances they want in the community, but at the council level, where they're supposed to set priorities, there's no discussion. It's like everything's agreed to. And gee, you didn't get the memo. The public is left out in the cold with no information. And of course, well, the election's taking place, business is occurring as per usual.
That's right. Now, talking about the election that was held this past fall, one of the city council members that's at this meeting in December is not coming back in January because he did not win his election. He actually, even as the incumbent, he didn't come in second, he didn't come in third, he certainly wasn't first. He actually came in fourth. But we're going to hear from one of his fellow council members who wants to give him a big pat on the back and to thank him for his time on the council. Now, Mr. Copeland, you know a little bit about this because he's from your district, right?
Yeah.
He's your representative, and he was appointed, and he was there for, what, a year?
Just about. Yeah, and I was the guy that came in third, so we had fun though. It was a great campaign. How many campaigns do you get into where the person that spends the most money wins the election? Oh, that's a shock. $230,000 according to the Star Tribune. This is even a month before the final reports are due now in January of 2020. We'll see what the total score is, but honestly, I spent $450, so what the heck.
And with our next clip, I want you to pay attention to the city council member who's speaking. That's Jane Prince. And sitting next to her is outgoing council member Kasim Basari. And this is important to see where their seating arrangement is, because in some of our future clips, you're going to notice something that is absent. Let's take a look at our clip. This is from their December meeting, 2019, St. Paul City Council.
All right, before we adjourn today, I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Prince.
Very good, thank you. And I would like to recognize our colleague and our first Somali city council member who has served us so well this year for his service, and to thank him. We'll be moving to a reception, but I wanted to say a few words about Kasim. As you guys all know, the way wards 7 and 6 are connected to each other, it's kind of like the boundary doesn't make any difference. All of our issues are so similar, our needs, our population. And so having a council member in the Ward 6 neighborhood who is so easy to work with was just a complete joy and a pleasure for me. And I want to acknowledge the many things that Kasim accomplished while he was with us. First of all, as I said, he is our first Somali American city council member, and that is a huge point to be made because of the importance of the Somali community to all of St. Paul. Kasim was responsible in a large part for working with the Port Authority to spearhead the purchase of the Hillcrest golf course site, which for the east side is a generational step forward.
A generational step forward, the Hillcrest Legacy Development. Now, of course, we've been covering this particular development here on these news programs. And certainly, we do want to congratulate Councilmember Kasim Basari in his service working on the St. Paul City Council, because that's not an easy feat to be an elected person. I mean, I was mayor of Maplewood. I know it's not necessarily an easy thing. But what I do question is that we have Councilmember Jane Prince, the goodbye girl, making this big story. And just as we saw with Commissioner Ortega, can we take the words at face value? because she said that he spearheaded the purchase of the Hillcrest Golf Course property by the Port Authority. Now, we have covered this news program, and we know and have reported that he was not one of the council members on that board of the Port Authority. We've done some research and looked at various different minutes and news articles. His name does not appear anywhere. Where did council member Jane Prince get this idea from? Maybe it was from that meeting way back in July 2019 when the Port Authority came to the St. Paul City Council asking for the St. Paul City Council to stand behind the $10 million in bonds, full faith and credit. Mr. Copeland, you were here to do that show.
Yeah, we did our research way back in July, you know, when this was before the council, ordinance 1939, and I have right here in my never nicotine stained hands, you know, the 3-page legislative text on this, and this was a creation of the Port Authority. Let's be candid. There wasn't anybody beating down the doors publicly, as you're going to see in a few minutes, on this issue. This was a bailout for a real estate burden that was being carried by the people that own the property, the pipe fitters union, and you know, the city bought the property through the Port Authority. They're issuing, as Dinah has said, bonds, $10 million, and you, the taxpayers out there, are all going to pay for it until it's all paid off. And the promises are that they're going to have, you know, hundreds of new homes and 1,000 new jobs, all on this 112-acre site. Well, we don't know that actually, because if you look, that was the PR from the Port Authority. But if you look at the city report on the money, we know that the Port Authority is committed to spend $2.5 million. We know that they've committed to provide a significant amount of open space. And we know that, you know, they're going to be not asking for any more money, any more TIF money, that is, or any TIF money, I should say, to be correct, in developing the project, which is all good news. But, you know, if you look at what went on at the old Ford site on the other side of town, can anybody believe anything that they're reading in this report here that was written in 2019? You know, it was about a decade-long process developing the Ford plan. They just sold it the end of last year to Ryan Companies. And when they went through the discussion about the subsidy, what was the commentary? Well, we would have liked to have had more, and we're going to be back asking for more, even though the agreement was set just before they bought the property from Ford Motor Company.
And I think it's important to talk about those numbers because I'm not quite sure how the numbers are going to work out for the Hillcrest Golf Course property. Because keep in mind, the pipe fitters, they purchased the property for about $4.3 million. Then it was determined that in order to do the environmental cleanup, it's estimated to be $2.5 million. Now, the Port Authority bought the property for $10 million. So, in essence, they not only bought the property for $10 million, but they also know they have a $2.5 million liability, which actually means that the cost of that property is $12.5 million. That really is what it is, and they should have actually gotten a discount because of the fact that there's the environmental cleanup. Rather than paying over double the premium of what that property was originally purchased for.
Well, and that property has sat for years on the market, and it hasn't budged a bit. I mean, the only thing that's changed on that property is, the leaves that have fallen over the seasons.
So do you think maybe they could have bought it for like $6 million?
Well, it seems to me that they should have been certainly much more aggressive in their pricing. I suspect what happened is that because Kasim Basuri, appointed by the very council members that were voting to pay the taxes that'll pay the bonds on this, that Mr. Basuri's presence and the fact that the property's in Ward 6, that he wasn't a leader on this at all, that he was in fact the passive person that sat there and didn't know what to do when there was no process, no public process, no planning process at all done by the city council before they agreed at this hearing you're going to see in a few minutes to spend all this money.
Let's take a look at our film footage. This is from back in end of June or beginning of July, somewhere around there in 2019. And we're going to listen to the commentary and pay attention to what Council Member Kasim Basuri has to say with regard to the City of St. Paul backing the $10 million in bonds.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. We're here today in support of the Port Authority's issuance of $10 million of general obligation bonds for the acquisition of the Hillcrest golf course site. As you know, we believe the site is an incredible opportunity for redevelopment, able to produce as many as 1,000 jobs and up to 1,000 housing units.
Now, Mr. Copeland, did you happen to notice that there was an empty seat next to Council Member Jane Prince?
I certainly did.
So maybe Council Member Basuri is just left the room momentarily.
Perhaps.
In reality, he was not at this meeting.
Yeah, that's a heck of a thing. He's getting credit for leading this great battle to enhance the city of St. Paul by taxing the citizens $10 million for a piece of property that got no review from any of the neighbors out there.
Well, and I think that to me, what I see is that this is just a way for some council members to use him as cover.
Absolutely.
To then say, well, because they know that there are certain people who are a little anxious about what might be developed there, about how much it costs, about the environmental cleanup costs. And so this is a way, unfortunately, to use Council Member Basuri, who is on his way out, to have him be the scapegoat. Because did he really spearhead the whole thing? Well, I don't know. Councilmember Jane Prince, are you being disingenuous with us? Well, let's take a look at what Councilmember Jane Prince said at this meeting in July of 2019.
Ms. Prince.
I want to be clear, and I appreciate my colleagues' concerns about Ford, but this is an incredibly important opportunity for the east side, where we haven't seen this level of investment in a long period of time. It is a site that's the size of the Ford site. It's very strategically located near a major corporation in Maplewood and with good freeway access. So I'm actually fully supportive. I'm grateful to the port as well as to PED for the commitment that they will begin the master planning process before the end of the year.
Who appears to be the advocate? Does it appear that it is Council Member Basuri, or is it in reality Council Member Prince?
Well, I think the entire audience and you and I all know the answer. And you're a good attorney because you say, right, our attorneys are taught not to ask questions they don't know the answer to. Jane Prince, you are definitely the star of the show. And of course, Jane is an attorney, a fairly sophisticated young lady, I must say, dealing with her. And, it's very clear, and it was clear back in July when we did the show that we did, that, what was going on here. But to listen to the discussion about, without Kasim Basari, this wouldn't have happened, as we heard at the December meeting, is just more nonsense. And treating the public to this kind of stuff is really beneath the council and the council member in particular.
Well, now this leads us to the next and last segment of our newscast this evening, and that is the continued coverage of the meeting that we attended last month of the Hillcrest Community Advisory Committee. And this is a committee of members from the community of St. Paul and Maplewood. And that the majority of the folks that are on this committee, they believe that their role on this committee is to provide input and insight to help guide the development that's going to be there at the Hillcrest site. And that's what they see their role is going to be. But as the meeting unfolded and we found out that really the technical committee has already met, that they've already put the plans together, and that they really see this community advisory committee as more of a programmed ambassador group that they're going to use to sell the concepts that the technical committee has basically already decided. And what we also discovered is that the technical committee, who is putting together all the plans, they are not subject to the open meeting law because they are not elected or appointed officials. They are all just planners, organizers, consultants, and they meet in meetings that are not open to the public. And so the public has no idea what those plans are until they're trotted out to the Community Advisory Committee, and the Community Advisory Committee then is expected to be the ambassadors to promote it to the community.
As I say, we had a decade of process, very public process, very, very heated public discussion in Highland community in Ward 3, for the Ford plant renovation or resurrection or whatever you want to call it, that Ryan Companies is now being heavily subsidized to provide to the city of St. Paul. And with the governor attending the final little kickoff ceremony last year, along with our mayor, it just strikes me as incredible. Discrimination in the sense that we can for our essentially very, very white and very wealthy most suburban part of St. Paul, perhaps the Highland, that there is one standard of treatment, and then for the over on the east side where we don't have quite the incomes and the houses are a little smaller and not valued as much, that we have a special opportunity there to be treated as though we have rubber stamps and are too uninformed to decide what we think is in our own best interest. So we have the technical advisors of the city telling, those are called bureaucrats in some people's parlance, telling these folks what they will approve and sell to their neighbors.
Getting back then to our meeting, that we were there with our cameras. That's the only way that you're going to be able to see what happened in those meetings and the discussions at these meetings of the Hillcrest Community Advisory Committee, is because we were there with our cameras. At this clip, this is where one of the facilitators is leading the members into this idea of how are we going to sell the concepts to the community? Let's take a look.
To build on that a little bit, do you think making a little toolkit that we could educate them in, like the community leaders or the organizations, on how to use these little toolkits to go out and gather more information for us? Like a little zine or little, maybe it's just a worksheet that they do, or maybe it's a smaller version.
A little toolkit. Well, okay. And then there was also this other disconnect within the meeting, in that the members of the committee organization, of the advisory committee, they were coming up with ideas on how to reach out to the public and members of the public to get their input into the process, to guide the process, and to have an impact on what was going to be developed. On the other hand, though, the facilitators were actually trying to get information on what organizations or nonprofits are in the community can they tap into who are going to partner with them, who will help to sell the concept. So we actually had two different conversations going on during this meeting where they all thought they were talking about the same thing, but when you listen to their discussion points, you can hear that the committee members were looking at it from a perspective of a resident and getting input from residents, whereas the facilitators were trying to figure out what organizations in the community can they tap into to have them do the footwork of the education. So let's move on to our next clip.
I'll tag on to what Coon said.
Okay.
They have to have bought into it first,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if they don't understand the value of it, they aren't going to put the energy in it, because everybody, especially this time of year, has way more to do. So I think the first step is to get an introduction. I want to make sure Ann has a chance to throw out ideas too.
Sure. We actually, on Payne Avenue, just did a community engagement process on November 21st and then again on November 30th. And it was a combination of things. So we had artisans and crafters selling things, so it was an opportunity. We had a gallery, and then the vendors. That was to bring people in. But then we had a survey with only 5 questions. And then we also had a selfie wall that kind of got kind of
So
popular.
something to socially bring them in.
Little, you know those props that they use and people can say. And then we had videotaping, so people, and also questions at the videotaping too. And it was about your community. How do you feel about your community? What would you like to see change? What's missing? What's, and so, but not a ton of questions. Just, it was the initial engagement piece to get, and it was pretty successful. The second day was during a snowstorm, and we still got people. But anyway, that's one idea. I went to another one that was very interactive once. They had, first they had a PowerPoint of different communities that had projects, whether it was a placemaking project or a park that they built or a school, or and so they did a quick videotape, and then they had a bunch of stuff like knickknacks and pipe cleaners and Legos and craft materials. They had a lot of stuff that obviously was purchased at a secondhand thrift shop, and they asked and there were teams to build, and you have to pick out, I have to build a house, or I have to build a park, or I have to do transit, or, they had different topic areas. So they picked one, and then they had to, use all this stuff and create that. And we had 2 artists sitting at the table here, and art is my passion. Using art as a community engagement tool is very effective. And it was the interaction and the engagement. The other thought I had was a big map. The big map as big as this table, maybe, of Hillcrest. And overhead, where people can really get familiar, because you can drive around it. And until you go on that Google app that told us about it, it's hard. It's really hard to get a concept of it, but it's like, wow, this really is big. So just some thoughts, kind of random.
Well, when I heard the whole plan about the arts and crafts, and that is the engagement in order to get input in what and how the development should be guided, I thought, how is this even consistent with what the technical group has already determined? shouldn't they take the plans that the technical group has already established, that they've already put together as their basic foundation for the development, put those out there, and then have that information out for the public, so then the public has something to work from and something to modify. Because if you're just starting off with a map and pipe cleaners, what is the typical person in the community going to do? They're going to just throw their hands up in the air and say, pipe cleaners? What the heck? I don't know anything about this. I'm going to let the experts take care of it. And of course, the experts will take care of it because they've got their plans in place. But that is really how they need to address this. And actually, in our previous news program, one of the members of this community advisory committee, he suggested that they should take a look at what those plans are and actually go and talk to people in the community individually. And he suggested going door to door, if you can believe that. But that is totally different than the plan to use pipe cleaners.
Well, see, that point that you just made makes me ask, how is it that they developed any plan at all if they didn't talk to anybody in the community except, I don't know, Kasim Busari, the great leader of this plan? Honest to God, this sounds ridiculous. And, we know what she did in her master's program and her graduate course, no doubt, in planning, playing with the pipe cleaners. Honest to God. I think about the east side, and I think about White Bear Avenue, and I think about a particularly large piece of ground right across the street from the high-rise. And, they used to have a bowling alley there and a bar and some other things, a jewelry store, a few other things. Hafner's. Anybody on the east side will know what I'm talking about. Well, they took Hafner's down. They got the bulldozer out. They made a hell of a parking lot, and they sell sandwiches there out of food trucks. That's what the pipe cleaner crowd has produced, in all these many years. We're all tired of pipe cleaners over there on the east side, and you ought to be tired of them if the pipe cleaners show up anywhere in your neighborhood, and I'm a guy that used to smoke a pipe. Why? Call me old-fashioned, but why don't they have a public meeting and ask the public to come and say what they want, what they don't want? And I have the answer to my question, and you know why they don't? Because they know that the public doesn't want an industrial site at the Hillcrest golf course, because it's completely surrounded by residential uses, folks. And that's why they're not asking you, because they've already decided for you, and here it comes, the big plan. Meanwhile, they got you playing with pipe cleaners? What an insult.
Well, Mr. Copeland, we've come to the end of our program so soon. This particular meeting was nearly 3 hours long, so we have a lot more to cover. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to continue this report next week, and then we're also going to put film footage of this meeting on YouTube as well, so you can watch it uninterrupted. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.